Hey, what is up, guys? It is Slick or Slick Moth here, back again with another video, with the first episode of 11, doing the Batman Arkham Spider-Man PS4 Comparison Series. I've got my good friend Evan Filarca here with me, who of course all of you are familiar with, leader, commander-in-chief, founder of the Spidey Squad. So, I want to talk about the story of Spider-Man PS4. So this, I think, is the most important comparison, because these are story-based games. They're not multiplayer games. They're not whatever. Really, the story is the heart of these games. That's what we were all anticipating, in addition to all the gameplay aspects and that kind of thing. So first, Evan, we know you love the story, but just give us your brief overview on the story, and then we'll incorporate the Arkham aspect of it as well.
Sure. Well, and I'll talk like minor spoilers too, but I think everyone's beaten the game at this point. But it's just
This video is full spoiler warning, everybody.
yes.
So yeah, go ahead.
Hold it's perfect. Like, I mean, it's everything I was expecting this game to be and more in terms of story. Totally incorporating what they were saying of it being an experienced Peter Parker. He's been Spider-Man for 8 years. The worlds collide, all that jazz. And having that go into how far they went with Peter's life being so important with working for Dr. Otto Octavius, and then him trying to make the world a better place with the work that they were doing with the prosthetics, and then Spider-Man just saving the city while also doing things as Miles and Mary Jane, and having these great character moments and really heartfelt, emotional, impactful scenes with them, just totally expanding the story in ways that I never could have imagined, was fantastic. And, I usually don't cry in video games. I cried like twice to 3 times during the ending of this game because of how emotional it was for me beating it and seeing how great the writing was for all these characters and how impactful they made them and how relatable they made them too. And, really having you care about not just Spider-Man, but also Peter and Aunt May and Martin Lee and Otto Octavius, all these characters in the story. I think that's a huge achievement on their part, is actually making the writing and the characters within the game feel really relatable and have you connect to them as not only just characters in the game, but as characters in general. And I think that's something that's really commendable on their part. And I think just they nailed all the story beats really, really well with Spider-Man and Peter, and I think they did a great job.
So, which parts of the story did you cry at? Let me guess. Okay, so you died you cried when Aunt May died.
Yes.
Maybe at the auto scene. Okay.
Yes.
And maybe this is kind of a reach. Maybe when MJ and Spidey kissed.
That didn't get me as much, but
okay.
The third time I cried was actually just when the credits were rolling.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Actually, like, beating the game, and me, like, ever since 2016, where we did that first ever collab video together, and how far we've come, and me being able to interact with everyone at Insomniac, and them including the Spidey Squad, and then just seeing the credits roll and how beautiful the credits look themselves was just like too much for me to handle.
It's been quite the ride. And you want to know something funny? I was just driving around the other day, and I realized that the Insomniac Studios are like 5 minutes away from where I live at UNC.
That's awesome.
The North Carolina one. Of course, their main studio is not in North Carolina, but still, it was still really cool. You just saw Insomniac in this big building. It's like, whoa, that was awesome. Okay, anyway, so yeah, I have to agree. I love the story. And here is one thing where we can sort of incorporate the comparison, and a leg up that I'm going to definitely give Spider-Man is the personal character beats. Now, we have them in the Batman Arkham games, of course. Exchanges between Alfred, Batman, Batman and, Nightwing, Batgirl, etc., etc. But in this game, they did a great job at incorporating the personal elements. Spidey going over for dinner at MJ's and, talking about, what meals he's good and bad at making or whatever. Those kinds of elements were really great. Seeing Peter Parker in a good chunk of this game, not in the suit, in Feast and that kind of thing. Those exchanges between Aunt May and even though she knew the whole time that he was Spider-Man, we didn't know that at the time, and we thought that these were purely Peter Parker and Aunt May exchanges. And those character beats where she's like, "Oh, where he's like, I really appreciate you and love you," and all that kind of stuff. Those are great moments that sometimes you don't get in the Batman Arkham games, especially because they're a little bit more focused on the story of stopping the villains or the bad guys or whatever, especially looking at Arkham City and Arkham Knight. We get a little bit more of those personal, psychological, internal moments of Batman's psyche, that kind of thing. Those are great moments that I enjoyed in that game, but overall, the character beats exchanges between Spidey and the very personable nature of him in the game. He's very likable. And, where, of course, Batman, just in the nature of who he is as a character, is a little bit more closed off. So I gotta say, that is a humongous advantage for this game. Seeing the personal character beats and moments between Peter Parker and the rest of the cast of the game. I mean, that stuff was incredible. And that really added some length to the game, some depth, and some, increased tension as well.
I absolutely agree. And when they nailed all these, exactly just what you said, the story beats, and having the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane be one of the most, significant highlights of it because of how their, romance blossoms throughout the story. But also what I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was is the mentor-mentee relationship between Otto and Peter.
Absolutely.
And just seeing that go into such a dark route where near the end of the game where he is indeed Otto Octavius becoming Dr. Octopus and seeing that downfall and then him knowing the entire time that Peter was Spider-Man and you get that really intense scene during the final boss fight was such an intense moment, and it wouldn't have paid off if they didn't make you actually care about Otto, because usually Dr. Octopus is just kind of sometimes seen as just kind of a cheesy villain. They really humanized him in this game and actually made it that we cared about Otto Octavius and made it that we didn't want him to turn into Dr. Octopus. So that way it was even more emotional when he was evil and was fighting Peter and actually creating the Sinister Six. And even all the other villains were really cool in their beats of the story as well. And also Peter interacting with Miles and having them introduce Miles in a way that you did care about Miles and you didn't want to be in the story, but it was a character that was meaningful to both Peter and Spider-Man. And I think that's a great way on how they handled his unique portrayal in this game.
You're absolutely right. And let me highlight two things that I actually did not like about that Doc Ock stuff. Overall, I love that. And it was a big shock to me. I wasn't expecting him to be the, his boss that he was working for. So that was an incredible moment. And also, there was a moment where I was a bit unsure where things were going. I genuinely thought he was a nice guy. And he was at the beginning of the game. He really, truly was a nice guy, making prosthetics for, veterans and, trying to make the world a better place as he began. One thing that I'm going to sort of detract from the game just a little bit is that I didn't think that we got a whole lot of moments with Doc Ock. He's the main villain of the game, but we only really had one boss fight, and we didn't talk to him or, communicate with him all too much. That's one thing that I'll detract from it just a little bit. Overall, though, we did get to see they had a lot of villains to sort of mediate with, and that was a true challenge. Another thing that I thought was a little bit weird is the notion that his neural interface thing was sort of making him a bad guy. In other words, it was accelerating these behavioral changes. I mean, it's plausible in some way and it makes sense to me, but I would have really liked to see that he was 100% driven by rage. In other words, he's the same person. He wasn't manipulated or changed by the neural interface. It's a little bit ambiguous how much of that was contributable to that. And if he truly was a victim of this neural interface, I feel kind of bad beating him up. How much of it was really driven by his rage and hatred for Norman Osborn? And how much of it was, him being a victim of this? So, overall, though, the Norman Osborn stuff excuse me, not Norman Osborn, Otto Octavius stuff was excellent. Excellent, excellent. And seeing the development of that character and sort of shifting from this seemingly nice guy, flexible, very nice to Peter, kind, generous, and that evolution towards being, the villain that we see him in the last act of the game, that was truly incredible. And that is, the main point of criticism that I'm giving there relative to the Batman Arkham games is one of the things that I love is that you're always talking to the Joker. He's in your ear in Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. You see him on the TVs and you can chat with him throughout the length of the game. Whereas in this game, we don't really get to talk to Doc Ock that much. We get those early character moments and then we don't see him for a few hours and then he comes back for the final boss fight. But I would have loved to see a little bit more interaction and sort of talking with him a bit more. But that's just me.
No, yeah, I totally get that. I think what they were trying to do is, which I freaked out even more, is that Spider-Man has been as Spider-Man for 8 years, and yet he hasn't fought Dr. Octopus, which I find really crazy to think about. So it's already implied that even though he hasn't fought Doc Ock before, he's worked a lot with him in the past. So it's like setting up that they've already been lab partners for a while now, or Peter's been Otto's assistant in the lab for quite some time. And then the beginning, which is such a cool foreshadowing shot where you first see Otto Octavius and you see all those wires strapped behind him looking like the tentacles in his back, which looks so cool. And then you get that moment between them. Two really heartfelt moments between them is where Otto sees the Spider-Man costume and he says, "Oh, it's you. Oh, you make Spider-Man's equipment."
Yeah.
But then it really is. I think then he already knew that he was Spider-Man right
Yep.
off the bat, flat out. The other scene is where they're making the arms, and then it's all the tennis balls juggling in the room, and that was really emotional. Where you understand how important this is to Otto, and then he reveals to Peter that he is sick, like his muscles are degenerating because
That was
he's
a great
not
moment.
well. And then he's like, if you want to find another job, I understand. But he's like, no, I want to stay here because I respect you and you're not, your mind. I'm really passionate towards trying to make the world a better place through your work. And if that's not going anywhere, neither am I. And then they hug. And then he turns evil because of not only the neural interface affecting his mind, but also because that's just who Otto is, because he wanted revenge on Norman. And even though the neural interface amplified his rage, it was said during that like hallucination sequence, pretty much that like, oh, I was already feeling this way, but the neural interface just made it even like more, like it made me feel those emotions even further. So it was even crazier to think like, well, was it the neural interface that truly made him Dr. Octopus, or was he already kind of Dr. Octopus?
Yeah.
So it's really cool to think about in that way. And yeah, just like you said, like having those moments between them and then having that fallout with the boss fight and then having that moment between them at the end was such an intense scene. And that's why I cried during it, because it was such an emotional part, having this great character interaction between Peter and Otto and then having it turn against you, or having him turn against you at the end and trying to take out this person that you actually really do care about in a really substantial way was excellent.
And that's the brilliance of what Insomniac has done with that character in particular, because you would never anticipate that, beating the crap out of Doc Ock would make you cry, right? Or it would make you elicit that emotional response, because normally you'd be like, oh, well, he deserves it. But this game, what they did is they reframed the pre-existing origin and sort of relationship between Doc Ock and Spider-Man, and in doing so, they're really sort of challenging our preconceptions about who that character is, and we feel for him much more. And that's what they did very, very well. And those emotional moments are what were excellent in this game. Now, let me get your thoughts comparing to the Arkham games. What do you think was maybe your highlights of emotional moments, and do you think they compare to the Spider-Man PS4 emotional moments? For instance, perhaps the death of the Joker, which I think they actually did do a good job of making us feel somewhat sympathetic and sad for the Joker, even after all the horrible things that he had done. It was quite a sad moment, I thought.
I think so too. And it was like back then in 2011 when Arkham City came out, I, wasn't expecting them to go that route. And
but
when
we
they
can
did
say the
actually,
same for them killing Aunt May. That's like a taboo. You never kill Aunt May because she's all that Peter Parker has left. Yet they did it in this game too. So I love the tenacity out of both of these studios to take the canon in directions that are big no-nos, and you never do. You never kill Aunt May. You never kill the Joker. In either universe, and they were, Rocksteady and Insomniac are both like, why is that the case? Let's push this in new directions. And that's what I love about what both studios have done with their respective franchises. But anyway, sorry, continue.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's really cool to think about, because this game's most definitely going to get a sequel. And if they kill off Aunt May and have Peter not fight Otto Octavius as Dr. Octopus before in the 8 years he's been Spider-Man, and then the post-credit scene heavily teasing Venom and Green Goblin, it's going to be insane what they're going to do in terms of story points. It's going to be so crazy. But for emotional points from the Arkham series as a whole, like Asylum, City, Origins, and Night, the death of Joker really caught me off guard. And I was actually like befuddled and like astounded that they actually did that, and how it ends like Gordon's asking Batman like, hey, what happened in there? Like Batman, then he just walks away and then it ends. And And
Yep.
you get this, of course, like clarity when playing as Catwoman. Then you get that little mini arc with her and Two Face. But for Batman, and then also expanding it with the Harley Quinn DLC, where you get more of a connection between Batman and Harley Quinn and Robin. But actually having Joker be killed in this universe because of the sickness that he was getting from the Titan formula, and then actually killing him off, it's like, wow, I feel really conflicted because I know it's probably good that he's dead since he's so evil and he's a murderous psychopath. But like, wow, like you actually do get this really odd connection with him as Batman, and you kind of feel bad that he dies in a way. And even what Batman says, like, I like, well, you want to know something funny? I would have saved you, and he's like, that is pretty
Absolutely.
funny, which is crazy to think about. And mainly the one of the huge emotional highlights for me during Arkham Knight is the entire like ending where you get this resolve where Jason Todd is Red Hood, and then he saves Bruce, and then this really cool confrontation between Batman and Scarecrow with the fear talks and everything, and then you get the mind trip with Joker in Batman's head, and then like the first person Joker sequences was really really kind of like a mind trip, like seeing how similar they are in different ways, and then the ending where he takes out Scarecrow and the city's safe, but he also takes out Joker in his mind, like he's not in Batman's psyche anymore. He plunged him away from the depths of his brain because how he's truly done with Joker. And that was like the big resolve of that entire arc because the main villain of the entire Arkham franchise is Joker, and that was the main highlight of their entire relationship with them going back and forth with this hero and villain dilemma, but also like how they are like two sides of the same coin. And when Batman shut the door on Joker in that, in the cell in his mind, it's like, I'm done with you. You're no more. I'm through with this. Like, I beat you, and which was a huge triumphant moment in that series.
Yeah, I agree. That was an interesting concept. The idea that even after the Joker's dead, he still kind of haunted Batman. That's kind of creepy.
Yeah,
Also, I mean, I think that you do kind of feel for the Joker. He is, in some ways, perhaps a victim, of mental illness. Really, if we're being truthful, and it also gives a highlight of Batman's sort of moral compass and virtue, and the fact that he didn't want to kill the Joker, and that's why he was upset, visibly upset, ignoring Jim Gordon. He did not want the Joker to die. He wanted to save him, even though theoretically, as you said, he probably should not. That's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to save the Joker because it's the right thing to do. And it's the same way when Norman Osborn is plummeting to his death after Doc Ock threw him off. I mean, you might actually do a little bit more good for the world if you let him splat. But Spider-Man saves him because that's the right thing to do. And the same can be said for the moral dilemma that he faces at the end, where he can save Aunt May, the only bit of family that he has left that's been by his side the entire time throughout his life, or save other people, strangers that he doesn't know, but save more people, and he made the right decision there. So these are the kind of decisions that both studios craft very, very well to give you an insight into their personal dilemma, their moral psyche and compass. And the Arkham Knight moments of getting a little bit inside of Bruce Wayne's mind, I thought were excellent as well. But I'm just gonna have to say, if I have to decide which story I prefer, looking at the Batman Arkham games versus Spider-Man PS4. This may come as a shock to some people, but I've got to go with Spider-Man PS4. Spider-Man PS4 story was incredible. It was emotionally provocative. It had character beats that I thought were incredible and unexpected. And if I have any bit of advice for where Insomniac can go with the next game, is even deeper with those character moments and, like Date Night with MJ and Peter Parker. Those were great moments where, he's over at her house, an apartment that, in my opinion, they were honestly short-lived. They could have been longer scenes, and I was totally enjoying it. And I get, you have 10-year-olds playing the game that just want to beat people up, and that's all they want the story to be. And you have to mediate those sorts of interests of people
yeah,
that just want to beat people up all the time, right? I get that. But I think that the strongest aspect of this story were the Peter Parker MJ moments, Peter Parker, Aunt May moments. It was just absolutely incredible what they managed to do in making this into honestly a movie. Um, which we saw in the Batman Arkham games as well. Don't get me wrong; those cinematic, excellent cutscene moments and that kind of thing. They just didn't have always the personability because of the fast-paced nature of the story taking place in one night. So my advice for future Arkham games would be to expunge upon that story length a little bit, and don't have to crunch this plot into 8 hours of just one after the other of next villain, next villain, next villain, and give the story a bit time to breathe and add those personal dynamics between Batman, Alfred, just hanging out in the Batcave and in Wayne Manor. I love those elements of Spider-Man PS4, and I hope that we can see more of them in Batman Arkham games in the future. So my final verdict, I've got to go with Spider-Man PS4 for the story.
Same here. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like everything that they did narrative wise and also gameplay wise, but mainly for the story, was outstanding. And even I've said this like multiple times, the thing, even though of course a Spider-Man game, the thing you would expect to like the most is the gameplay itself, and swinging is amazing, the combat's great, but the thing I was always looking forward to the most ever since 2016, where they revealed that trailer, was indeed the story, because of how it's such a cool idea of having Peter be experienced. He's been Spider-Man for 8 years. He graduated college. He's not a kid anymore. He knows what he's doing, and he's fought lots of its villains in the past. And having that dilemma play out in the story in such a cool, thought-out way was my favorite part about the entire game. I was engaged in the entirety of the story since the beginning to the end. Nothing bored me. Nothing confused me. I was all in it, and I just loved how they handled all the characters' portrayals. Even smaller characters like the side villains, like Taskmaster, were really interesting. And even the minor characters that were in there for a small amount of time, like Jefferson Davis, really made me care about them. Even though they were in it for like such a small amount of the game, they still made me care a lot about their character arcs and their personalities. And that shows how they have a great writing team for this game. John Paquette, Ben Arthman, and Christos Gage, along with Dan Slott, really wrote a great story for this game. And I've never, was invested more in a story more than I was with this game story. And just like how well they wrote these characters in this first ever game that they've done for Spider-Man makes me even more excited for what they can do in the sequel, and obviously the DLC, which is going to have even more story arcs with other characters with Spider-Man, which is going to be awesome.
Absolutely, and Dan Slott's an incredible writer. I'm actually reading a graphic novel that I got the other day, Arkham Asylum: Living Hell. It's actually written by Dan Slott, normally a Marvel writer. I've also read Renew Your Vows, which is kind of what I was expecting to get with this game, with like Peter and MJ being married. We did not, but I've got to say, I love the direction that they chose because of this. We're partners, right? In this on again, off again relationship. I feel like we've all been in that situation. The ambiguity of you not really knowing where you stand with another person, and it just made that final kiss at at the close of the game all the more satisfying and rewarding, knowing that we had to work for it just a little bit. So anyway, guys, I hope you all have enjoyed the video. Our verdict is Spider-Man PS4, edging out just barely the Batman Arkham games story-wise. Of course, both games, in my opinion, and franchises have excellent campaigns
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and stories, but we've got to give it to Spider-Man PS4 just because of the some of the directional changes and unique places that they took the story. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Evan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me once again, Slick Moth. It's an honor, and I hope that you viewers stay tuned for the rest of his awesome series, because it's going to be a really fun time.
Yes, be sure to stay tuned. I've got my friend Gavin, member of the Spidey Squad, coming on. I also have Marcel, Salvage1009. He'll be here as well, so be sure to stay tuned for all of that. And once again, some of those videos will just be solo, but 5 p.m. every day for the next week and a half. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Signing off.